Hello everyone. Welcome to the introduction to constitutional law. Okay. We will be discussing in this lecture what is constitutional law all about, how to study, syllabus for constitutional law, the nature for previous year questions, how to study, where to study on, and should there be any focal points. Okay. What specifically to focus on while you are studying constitutional law for UPSC law optional. Okay. So, what is constitutional law? A constitution is basically the source of all power for any country. Okay, whether you have a written constitution and unwritten constitution. Britain does not have a written constitution, but even then it calls the overarching consensus on what is to be done as its unwritten constitution. Okay, because that is the source of all power. So in government. So constitutional law is about interpreting that source. Okay, interpreting the source of all power. This is not just a charter of rights, although a charter of rights is a major part of it, but it is also about the structure of government. Let's say the three organs: legislature, executive, judiciary. The US Constitution gives a very strict separation of all. The Indian Constitution has a division of roles and responsibilities between them. So the structure of government is a part of constitutional law itself. It also defines the hierarchy and the powers of each organ. Okay. So how can a Supreme Court or a High Court review a case that is of the same court? How can the Parliament make laws? Okay, for various portions. Okay, what is in the power of the Parliament? What is in the power of the state legislature? So all of that is defined in the Constitution. And lastly, the Constitution defines the role of citizens and non-citizens. When we will study fundamental rights, for example, you will see that a lot of rights are available only to citizens and a lot of rights are available to all persons. Okay, and the categories differ accordingly. So it defines the relationship of the state with both citizens as well as non-citizens in different contexts. So that is what constitutional law is effectively all about. In UPSC, the syllabus is very specifically defined for constitutional law. We'll look at the syllabus for Consti specifically. The first one is Constitution and Constitutionalism, the distinctive features of the Constitution. So various provisions such as secularism, federalism, democracy, all of this shall be discussed. Secondly, we have fundamental rights, PIL, public interest litigation, legal aid, and legal services authority. Okay, in this course, however, we will not be looking at legal aid and legal services authority. We will discuss that when we come to the contemporary legal developments. All right. The next part is a relationship between fundamental rights, directive principles, and fundamental duties. Okay. So many a times the UPSC has asked questions on how all of these interfere with each other, intersect, interact, etc. Because ultimately, fundamental rights are not just a standalone part. Restrictions can be imposed upon them by fundamental duties. Not all restrictions imposed for propagation of fundamental duties are valid. So, this becomes a major topic in itself, but not a huge one. The next is constitutional position of the president and relation with Council of Ministers. Okay. Then we come to governor and his powers. So both the nominal heads of state. Then the legislative powers, privileges and immunities. Okay. So this is considering the legislative wing. This was considering the executive wing. We have the Supreme Court and the High Courts, their appointments and transfers, powers, functions, and jurisdictions. So here we had the executive, here we had the legislature, here we have the judiciary. All three organs, as mentioned in the constitution, have been covered. There are emergency provisions, amendment of the constitution, both very important parts in the constitution. The role of services under the union and the states, the recruitment, conditions of service, and constitutional safeguards, which is Article 310, 311. Administrative tribunals is also mentioned, but we will discuss that in administrative law within the same course itself. Then we come to UPSC and SPSC, State Public Service Commission. What are their powers and functions? And the Election Commission and its powers and functions. Okay. So the role of these different organs in the maintenance of democracy. Please note, other organs such as the Finance Commission or the CAG, they are not mentioned and hence they are not asked in the UPSC questions of previous years either. Then we have the center, states and local bodies. Okay, this is what the heading says, that the distribution of legislative powers between union and states, local bodies. This as a topic we will deal with towards the end of the entire lecture course. Okay, administrative relations between union, states and local bodies. Lastly, eminent domain, which is state property, common property, community property, and the power of land acquisition. Right? So this constitutes the syllabus for both of these slides, constitute the syllabus for the entire constitutional law paper, which is paper 1 part A, right? Paper 1 part B is international. Now, what has been the nature of previous year questions? Most questions are directly from the syllabus. Okay, if the question is supposed to be from the constitutional position of the president, you will not have a doubt when you read the question that which part of the syllabus is this from. Okay, it is very clear because it's a very segmented, good, very well regimented syllabus. So questions are directly from the syllabus. Many times they only refer to one specific case. Okay, so for example, they might just refer to Ram Javaya Kapoor, one very famous case that we'll study, and only ask you to analyze constitutional position, and the answer will be Ram Javaya Kapoor. They only refer, they normally don't ask. Sometimes they ask you to critically examine or explain or discuss a quote. Okay, let's say it's a quote on equality, that absolute equality can also lead to inequality sometimes. So all of these are quotes. Many times these are quotations directly from Supreme Court judgments. Okay, that some judgment either in the recent past or in a very landmark case, the judge might have said this. So we will discuss some of these, and the rest we will discuss in the previous year question discussion when we do that. Okay, they basically ask these questions for the purpose of philosophy of constitution and its salient features. Okay, so when we are looking at federalism, when we are looking at secularism, democracy, that is when these questions are more commonly asked, that is India really a federal country, etc. Those types of questions. So there you are actually required to examine. Rarely your opinion or evaluation is asked. Okay, that there might be one question which asks your opinion on whether the right to education has been successful, or whether or not India has actually fulfilled its demand of federalism, or local bodies have been successful, etc. So once in a while, it's not absolutely infrequent, but happens only once in a few years or once a year, not more than that. And usually there is 1 to 2 recent current affairs of Supreme Court judgments as well. that if there's been a very, very landmark case, then it's normal, it's expected that you should know it for the purpose of the answer. But it is not normally done in the case of minor judgments. Okay, it's only for very, very important judgments. How do we study constitutional law? The first and the foremost source, and this is one mandatory source that you should have, is the bare text of the constitution. Okay, you can study from any source otherwise, but always have a copy of the constitution with you so that you read the exact language that the provision has. Okay, many times you might be reading in a commentary, something is said about some article, but unless you have studied the exact article, it is going to be a difficult journey. Take one reference book normally. Okay, D.D. Basu and M.P. Singh, these are good books. You can use them. Okay, if you don't have time, then a Dukki is sufficient. Is actually very clear if you use a Dukki. And most of the cases are summarized pretty well. I normally recommend D.D. Basu or M.P. Singh for the purpose that you will always know what a landmark case is, although a Dukki also does that very well. But there is a context to many constitutional developments. Okay, sometimes certain amendments were passed for certain objectives, and the courts reacted in a way. The Constituent Assembly debate said something, then the courts interpreted that thing in a manner. So the Dukki many times, especially for constitutional law, does not provide all answers. So for the context of these cases, you should ideally read a reference book, which is why in this course also we have tried to incorporate as much context possible, that you will not just know what the case said, but what were the brief facts or the political scenario under which the case had to come out, because this is constitutional law and Supreme Court doesn't normally say anything until unless in that time that was the general current of what was required, right? You can always have value addition through the Oxford Handbook of Constitutional Law. Oxford Handbook is a great source, brilliant source for referring to different articles on different topics. So you will have good scholars, very famous scholars who have written articles in this book. In fact, since I graduated from National Law University, Delhi, so many of the authors of different chapters, Professor Aparna Chandra, Professor Anup Surendranath, were my teachers. So that has been my good fortune that I actually got to learn from them. And these are wonderful articles. You can always use certain quotes from these articles from different judges for value addition. Ideally, you should look for value addition once your course is complete. Okay, not before. Keep your current affairs updated. Okay, use the internet. Best source is the internet for current affairs. The websites Live Law, Bar and Bench, all of these provide current affairs. There are multiple websites now, but there are also digests on different topics. Okay, so an annual digest will have all the major topics which cover that portion. Besides this, these are some special focus points that whenever you are going to study constitutional law, you should be looking at it for the purpose of UPSC mains at least. Law optional requires this much for a good score. Firstly is the story building part. Okay, look for the story. Okay, look for the context of events, that if the 24th or the 25th amendments were passed, why were they passed? What was the year in which they were passed? Who was the prime minister when they were passed? Okay, there were many judgments which were passed only under the regime of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, and the reactions by Mrs. Gandhi were also in proportion to the severity of the judgment. So you see that this back and forth with the judiciary and the executive, but different prime ministers had different orientations, different presidents. When we discuss the constitutional position of the president, they had different orientations. So look for the story, look for certain contexts, the surrounding circumstances, what was happening. Okay, this will give you a broader idea for why things were happening. Okay, so don't just look at Supreme Court's actions, also look at the laws which were being passed. Okay, the conventions, if they were being followed, violated. Okay, many times when you read parliamentary procedure, etc., this question will arise. Okay, so be mindful whenever this opportunity arises. Also look for scholarly opinions. Okay, there are American, British judges, Australian judges as well, who have given wonderful uh, courts judgments. They can be used to buttress your answers. Okay, so you will rarely find such scholarly opinions in a Dukki. Better is to read the reference books for this, and famous constitutional scholars, right? There is Tirvai, Soli Sorabji, books by Fali Nariman, etc. Other people who have had a very tremendous experience in the Supreme Court, in High Courts, retired judges, etc. So their opinions matter a lot. Then there are the Constituent Assembly debates. A very important source and a very good source to add value. Okay, because for any article that you're studying, there is a website, constitutionofindia.net, right? You can go to this website, select any article, and you will find the uh, Constituent Assembly debates which happened on this topic. So always look at them. So this will give you various viewpoints on why a law is good or bad, and that even when it was enacted, probably it was not a consensus between everyone that this is the law that should be passed, right? And then also look at various jurist opinions. Okay, many times in the same case, there are different judges, right, who give different opinions, be it concurring opinions or uh, dissenting opinions. So look at this specifically. Views of the same judge across multiple cases. Okay, many times you will see that the same judge gave various judgments across different times. Right? For example, Justice Bhagwati, we will be discussing him a lot. So try to look for patterns, try to look for a consistent history, because nothing works better than a story. It also shows that you understand it in that much depth, right? And also be mindful how the Supreme Court gradually changed its views. Okay, the Supreme Court over time, for example, has allowed for the decriminalization of homosexuality, when earlier it was not in so much favor. Right? The Supreme Court has now allowed for a right to privacy, when in earlier benches it did not accept that. So keep looking for all such uh, developments in jurisprudence, because that will give you a much bigger advantage over your competitors, in this sense that if you're able to remember all of it, and you will only be able to remember all of it over multiple revisions. Okay? It's not a single times job, but ideally uh, give it time and read constitutional law with patience. Don't hurry into articles, don't hurry to complete this part of syllabus at least, because here a depth of understanding is much better than just cramming the contents of different parts, because uh, that will value more in the longer run. Right? There are other topics when you study criminal law, etc. There, not understanding the context of cases, etc., is completely fine, because uh, the context is just that someone did a crime and then it was tried. But in constitutional law, don't come to the same conclusion. Okay. So, thank you.